Erev Shabbat Shalom. This Shabbat is a very powerful Shabbat, as this is a Shabbat Mevachim. We bless the month of Menachem Av, which is beginning Sunday night, and Rosh Chodesh is Sunday night and Monday, which the laws of the 9 days begin on this Sunday night. I've posted a guide on our chats it's important to review what's allowed, what's not allowed. Also, this Shabbat is Shabbat Chazak, the Shabbat that we conclude the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. We concluded by reading two Parshiyot, Parshat Matot and Parshat Masei. And Shabbat over here in Great Neck begins at 7:51 p.m. here today, Friday afternoon. If you're living outside of Great Neck, please search for your local candlelighting times in your vicinity. Chabad.org has a guide, and you could even Google it. Ladies, please don't forget to light the candles on time. If need be, after 7:51, we have 18 minutes, but no more than that. Please try to light earlier than that if possible. And of course, encourage your daughters older than 3 years old to light along with you, and please put a few cents tzedakah beforehand, as we do throughout the entire year, but it's so much more relevant today because next week, Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat that precedes Tisha B'Av in the Haftarah, we are going to conclude with the famous pasuk, Tzion b'mishpat tifadeh ushaveh b'tzedakah. Tzion, the Jewish people, will be redeemed through the laws of the Torah, through engaging and occupying themselves with the Torah, learning the Torah, and their captives are going to be redeemed through tzedakah. This is, of course, referring to the spiritual captives, but of course it refers to the physical captives. We have brothers and sisters who are unfortunately spent the majority of the year at this point in captivity. Please, let's give a few cents to tzedakah, 18 cents, 28 cents, and ask Hashem to please redeem the Jewish people, and first and foremost, redeem them. One of the greatest questions that has sort of plagued humanity is, how do we retain our youth? We certainly recognize the strength, the vibrancy, the excitement, the curiosity, and some will even say the invincibility of our youth. And as we get older and life starts bogging us down, we trade our youth for routine, and eventually old age sets in when the routine becomes the primary goal, where the excitement wanes away, the curiosity moves away, the vibrancy moves away. We take slower steps and more measured steps. We often sit much more, and we just resign ourselves to the day-to-day routine, and old age starts taking over. How do we retain this youth? How do we retain our vibrancy? Or how do we delay it? That's most of the questions that most of humanity have asked throughout the ages. We have scientists probing it, we have psychologists, and etc., etc. On the flip side of that, one can ask, is youth the optimal setting? Is that the goal? Obviously, we recognize that although the youth is powerful, the sentiment that youth is wasted on the young implies that there are certain developments that we achieve post our physical youthful times, mainly wisdom and experience, as our Mishnaic sages teach us that there's no greater wisdom than the wisdom that emanates from experience in itself. And therefore, when we review our youthful years, we realize how much we've wasted. How much could have been had we known better. As the saying goes, if I had only known back then what I know today, ... And obviously, there's definitely a virtue in older age than there is in youth. So we could reconcile by saying that there's both have their advantages and their disadvantages. Someone once wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe bemoaning that now that he is older, it's very difficult for him to get out and go to the weddings and dance like he used to on a nightly basis. And the Rebbe responded to him, who said that at this point of your life you need to? If you see you can't, it means that Hashem is delivering your message that perhaps you don't need to go out so frequently or even go out like that, because now you've developed wisdom and experience, and this is the stage to utilize that, and even more so. With all the vigor and vitality that one possesses in the youthful stage, they lack the experience, and therefore they need to put in much more physical effort, much more intense effort. But with wisdom, you could work smart. You don't have to work hard. You don't have to work as hard as you did, because now you know how to maneuver and how to respond and how to deal with things much more fluidly. So obviously there is a virtue in one that the other one doesn't possess, and vice versa. All the answers are always in the Torah. And as the Alter Rebbe taught, one must live with the times. This means live with the times. His brother explained what his brother meant, that one must live with the Parsha of the week, as the Parsha is alive. And as we know that each time we probe into the Parsha, no matter how many times we've learned and we've delved and we really, really mined, there's always more, and it's always relevant because it's infinite in nature. Because the Torah emanates from Hashem's infinite wisdom, and therefore the Torah bears infinity within it. So let's delve into this week's double portion. As we said, we read two portions together, Matot and Masai. The word Matot means the tribes. As this week's Parsha begins, and Moshe spoke to the tribes, instructed them in regarding the laws of Nedarim, of when one takes an oath upon themselves. But it's very interesting because this word matot is not frequently used in the Torah itself to refer to the tribes. Often the word for tribes is shvatim, shevet, the shevet of Levi, the shevet of Reuven, etc., etc. Yes, it's used, but very sporadically, the word matot. Why does the Torah change the wording over here? We know that the Torah is exact and precise in every word. And it has an absolute purpose to it. There are no redundancies, there are no beautiful prose, there's no euphemisms. Everything is exact and precise. What is this word matot? Why not say shvatim like we conventionally do throughout the Torah? Aside from that question, there's another question we could delve into. Most of the years, Parashat Matot and Masai are read together. Sometimes, some years, they're read apart. But according to the principle that the Rebbe spoke about many, many times, the Torah principle, based on the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, the name of the Parsha is not just a reference point. So we can refer to the Parsha by some sort of a name. But rather, as we've discussed previously, the name of the Parsha, as well as the name of any given entity in Hebrew, the Hebrew name of it, encapsulates the very essence of the Parsha, of the person, of the entity. Therefore, we have to ask a question over here. Being that we have a double Parsha, There must be an intrinsic connection between both of the parshiyot, but in fact, on the surface level, when we understand the names of the parshiyot, it seems that they sort of contradict each other. Matot, the word mateh, throughout the Torah, beginning in Parashat Shmot, the word mateh means staff. Like Moshe's staff that Hashem told him to drop on the floor and in front of Paro so it could become a snake, etc. The staff that Moshe Rabbeinu utilized to part the Red Sea. A staff is rigid, static, it doesn't bend. It represents stability. For example, on a conventional level, when does someone use a staff? Like a walking staff, in order to become more stable as they're walking. However, on the opposite side of the spectrum, the second parsha that we're reading this week, Parshat Masai, means the travelings. As the parsha begins, these are the travelings that the Jewish people traveled from Egypt. 42 journeys, as the parsha describes. We traveled and we sojourned. We traveled and we sojourned. Well, this is the complete opposite of matot. This represents movement, instability, because when one is on a journey, there are ups and downs. There are various locations. There's this place and there's that place, and this has this feature and this has this feature. In other words, there are changes, there's fluctuations, the opposite of matot, which means firm, rigid, stable. So what is the connection between these two? How could we reconcile between matot and Masai? The Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Chabad movement, Baal HaTanya, who wrote the Tanya in the Shulchan Aruch, explains the difference between the word shevet, which means tribe, and mateh, which is in this week's parsha implies tribes. A shevet is, in its actual Hebrew meaning, is a branch. Is a branch of a tree while it's still connected to the tree. In other words, it has life. It has vitality. It could produce. However, mateh, a staff, the difference between a branch and a staff is a staff was once a branch at some point, but it was disconnected from the tree. And therefore it dies out, dries out, and becomes very firm and rigid. The shevet, the branch in itself, has life, has moisture. It's bendable. It's malleable. Even if you bend it, it doesn't break immediately. It will eventually revert back to its original position. In contrast to that, the mateh, the staff, is dry, has no more moisture inside of it, and therefore it's rigid completely. To the extent that you can't really bend it. You have to really force it to bend, and if you bend it too much, you'll snap. One more difference between a shevet, a branch, and a staff, a mateh, is that while being connected to the tree, the branch is affected by its climate, by the external climate in which the tree is planted in. The various climates, the heat, the cold, bears changes upon the shevet, upon the branch. However, a mateh, a staff, does not get affected by the externalities, by the external weather conditions. Let's delve deeper. The Rebbe explains that the difference between shevet, branch, and mateh, staff, is not just a difference between two types of sticks, but reality, two types of personalities. There are those types of people who are considered to be a shevet, a branch. These are very soft and malleable, easygoing. They are able to acclimate to the situations around them. They flow very well throughout life. They're able to subliminate themselves and be humbled and not break from it. They're able to apologize. They're able to move on after traumas, after situations. They're fluid in life. And they happen to be very sensitive. And that when they hear painful sentiments being thrown upon them or upon others, it does affect them. Because after all, they are sensitive. On the other hand, the mateh type of personality, the staff type of personality, is completely diametrically opposite. This type of personality, I should say, is very established, very firm, somewhat even rigid in their mannerism, but they're very strong and sometimes can be even very tough. They're not malleable with their opinions. They don't bend easily at all. They will stick to whatever they believe in 100%. These type of personalities have a great virtue to them, is that when they say that they're going to do something, you could bet everything upon their word, because when they commit to something, they're 100% there. But aside from the general humanity division in personalities, we too, within the frame of our personalities, bear these two types, these two archetypes. We have the shevet part of our personality, the staff part of our personality, and then we have, the branch type of the branch part of our personality, and we have the mateh, the staff part of our personality. In the beginning of our lives, the youthful part, it's quite obvious that for the most part, most of us are a shevet. We're like the branch. We're very soft, full of life and vibrancy. We learn very quickly. We observe so much information, absorb so much information, constantly curious. And different social circles and different classrooms and different types of teachers and parental styles have an effect on us. We're obviously much more sensitive and softer than we are in our older age. Our inner confidence isn't as developed yet. And because of that, we are not so quick to take on very difficult responsibilities because we feel this is too much for us. It is too much weight because we're not that strong to hold on to it yet. And therefore, in our youth, we often cast the quote-unquote burden of responsibility upon our parents, upon our teachers, our politicians. We're quick to blame. We're quick to point fingers. But all in all, we are much more susceptible, as we just said, to our environmental climate. Things are good, we tend to be very excited and happy and so carefree, etc. If things are difficult, we start putting on defense layering and so on and so forth. There's a very interesting story, an anecdote. Once someone came, I believe to the Rebbe, and asked him, actually, he was praising his child. He says, "Oh, my son, what a tzaddik! My little 3-4-year-old, what a tzaddik! He walks around when he sees any strings on the floor. He pretends to tie it upon his arm, upon his head. He always pretends to put on tefillin." And the Rebbe says, maybe you should start davening in a minyan more and less at home, because your child is emanating what he is seeing. Now, there's obviously a virtue and a deficit to this. Children, we know, are like the branches. They absorb everything from the outside. We know how much, we've discussed so much and throughout our classes, how much our youth impacts our entire life. Both the positive and fortunately or unfortunately, it depends if you're looking from the surface or internally, also the negative. When a child is in the state of a shevet, of a branch, just like the branch in itself is connected to the tree and depends on the tree for the nutrients in itself, and if a nutrient isn't passed along fluidly to that branch, we could imagine that the branch could easily complain to the tree, "You're not giving me what I need." So to a child who is utterly dependent on his parents, on his caretakers, when he feels or she feels a deficit, they look to their elders, to the parents, to the teachers, to their local politician. "Why aren't you giving me what I need?" There's obvious comfort that comes from that as well, that I know that all my needs are provided for. That my food is provided for, my shelter is provided for, my clothing, my education, all of that is provided for by my roots, which is the tree itself. But as we know, we must grow up. None of us are born to be cute babies, cute children, adorable children. That's not the aim of life. The aim of life is to grow up and at some point become independent, to take responsibility for us and stop looking outside of ourselves for signals to help us discover our true selves. That's in the beginning of our life. At some point, one must grow up and start discovering for themselves and achieving for themselves. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, "Lechu vanim shimu li yiras Hashem elamedchem." Go, my children, listen to me, I'll teach you the fear of God. The very, very first class I ever came to in Chabad of Flatbush in Lamed Shvat, the 30th of Shvat, 1996, Tafshin Nun Vav, the rabbi, I don't remember who it was, but explains this pasuk. It says, seemingly, if he is inviting his children to come and learn from him, then why not say, "Come, my children, come closer, I want to teach you." What it means that go, my children, lechu, go. That the ultimate gauge of the strength of the student, of the child, is not when they're in proximity to their parents. It's specifically when they grow up and they move away from their parental home and from the tree in itself, and they must develop themselves, and then you could gauge whether the education style of the parents worked and was retained by the child and in its intended form or not. But at a certain point, one must grow up and start carving their own life and start carving out their own path. And if we really want to delve into this, even on an organic level, yes, one has to disconnect from where they came from in order to do this. But at this stage is when you start discovering who you really are. What are your strengths? What are your real abilities? What is your style of maneuvering and coping with the world? What is your function and purpose in the world to bring light, as we spoke about many times? Because in our parents' home, yes, we're able to do, but it's not really us. It's our environment. If one remains at home, if one remains in their childish way, they will never discover themselves. They will always be dependent on the outside for their signal. It's very interesting. The Kosker Rebbe once brought a mashal. There's a very famous teaching that if you are you because I am I, and I am I because you are you, then you are neither you and I'm neither I. But if you are you because you are you and I am I because I am I, then you are you and I am I, and we could be together. In other words, if one's entire persona is nothing more than a mirror and reflection from what's happening outside of them with the people outside of them, then they're not themselves. They're being nothing more than a mirror to the actual image. And that's a shame, because there's only one of them in the entire schematic of the universe, of history. As we said many times, Reb Zusha was once asked, Reb Zusha, would you like to be Avraham Avinu? And he says, God forbid. For what use would it be to Hashem? What benefit would it be to Hashem having two Avrahams, not even one Zusha? And as we said many times, that comes out of a place of humility, because if Hashem made you, He needs you to be you. He needs your strength, He needs your ups, He needs your abilities and your deficiencies, etc., in order to bring Mashiach. So if one is childish and is always looking outside of themselves for a signal, am I good or am I not? Well, this is a mashal that's given to the axiom of the Kosker Rebbe's axiom. A person has an identity crisis of sorts. He forgets from time to time of who he is. So he goes to a rabbi, and the rabbi advises him, why don't you tie a string on your finger as a mnemonic device, so each time you look at the string, you remember that this is who you are. Oh, what a great idea, he says. And then he goes to the mikvah. And this time he tied the string on his toe so he could wash himself, etc., with his hands. He was afraid that it's going to fall, so he tied it, he wound it around his toe. But he apparently didn't wind it that strong, and the string became dislodged from his toe and floated away, and became lodged upon and wound upon somebody else's toe. So out of desperation, the person that had this identity crisis now goes to the person with the string on his toe and says, I know who you are, but could you tell me who I am? In other words, if you're looking outside of yourself to discover who you, that's not healthy. Yes, in the beginning of our life, that's the settings. Because we haven't yet developed, we haven't yet really learned, we haven't yet experienced. So we need our backgrounds, our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our community leaders to help us define us. Not that it goes away completely, God forbid, because there's always an intrinsic bond and give and receive from our within the frame of our relationships. But we could certainly discern the difference in that fluidity from between our first stage of life and later on in life. From a parental perspective, we have to always bear this in mind. We spoke about many times in our parenting classes that the essence of parenting, of course, it goes without saying, Jewish parenting, we learn from a pasuk that Shlomo HaMelech taught, Chanoch nenar al pi darko, educate, raise a child based on their need. In other words, we shouldn't educate and raise our children based on our own needs. I have a need for brilliance, and I have a need for religiosity, and I have a need, and therefore my child also needs it. I have a need for love and to give love, therefore my child needs my love. No, that's convoluted. Even psychology will say that if parents raise their child based on their own needs, God forbid, even if it's loving needs, come, I love you so much, I want to hold you so much, come, I don't want you to suffer, if you fall, I don't want you to... Then that creates all types of issues and anxieties in the child. This interesting anecdote, it was Chaim's first day in kindergarten, and his helicopter mom brings him to kindergarten, and I've seen this with my own eyes so many times. She brings him and she says, she says to him, my dear son, my beloved son, today's your first day in school. I want you to know how much I love you, and I want you to be protected. And you should know I'll wait for you at home and daven that you'll be so successful in the class, in school. She brought her son to the classroom. She was about to leave, but then she thought, let me go and set up his cubby. Let me make sure that he has everything that he needs. And she spent the majority of the morning making sure that her son has everything that he needs in the class. When she finally came to understand that there's nothing else to do, she went home with all this anxiety. How is it going to be? What's going to happen? When Chaim came back home, she was like, a nervous wreck. She says, how was it? Tell me, my beloved son, how was your first day? What did you learn? He says, you know what I learned? I learned that I have a name. My name is Chaim. First time I heard somebody call me that. Because his mom was always calling my beloved, my this. There's no individuality that you matter. So long as the mother is going to have that type of mentality, you're my diamond, you're my tzaddik, you're my this, my world, my life, I live for you. But without a name, without individuality, Chaim, or the proverbial Chaim, cannot develop the Chaim. He is always going to be the shadow of his parents, the mirror of his parents, And they might be brilliant and amazing, like Avraham, but there won't be a Zusha. There won't be the individual that's meant to come out, the individual branch that needs to emanate from the tree. It's only when the mom, especially in our story, took the step back, and yes, she was worried about it, is when Chaim started discovering that there's a Chaim here. Yes, it's not easy. It's somewhat traumatic, but there's no other way for one to take hold, for one's personality to start emerging. On the flip side of that, conversely, although we all start as branches, as shvatim, which are interdependent upon their parents, etc., but at a certain point we start becoming a mateh. When we have to grow up and leave our youthful homes, we become more of a mateh, of a staff. Sturdy, strong, we become more financially independent, we start developing our own experiences, and therefore we could rely more on what we've learned thus far, and we're not always like paralyzed with fear, what's going to happen. Because, by the way, parenthetically, if one is still like constantly double questioning themselves and I don't know, and that it means that they haven't yet left their youthful selves. But with that, we have to keep in mind and bear in mind that although experience makes us more sturdy and more confident, and therefore we could rely on the experience, we could rely on our pre-knowledge, we could or our knowledge, etc., we can't let go of the Shevet part. We can't let go of our youthfulness. Yes, there's an absolute benefit of becoming a mateh, becoming a staff. That independence is absolutely vital to our purpose in this world. But we shouldn't trade youth for the experience. Reb David, my first boss, who founded Lubavitch Youth Organization here in America in 1956, Beit Iyar, Tafshin Tet Vav, explains, 1955. I asked him, why is it called Lubavitch Youth Organization, being that I didn't see teenagers working there. He was in his already late 60s, early 70s when I met him and he was the head of the Lubavitch Youth Organization. Along with the board, there were some younger people there, but most of the people are 50s, 60s. He explains that when the Rebbe gave them name, means that no matter what stage you are in life, you should always retain your youthfulness, your vibrancy, your excitement, that every single activity you're involved, do it like a youth, do it with energy and vigor. Because otherwise, what we typically see is that youth is traded for old age very quickly. I've seen this with my own eyes when I was working in the Atria. There were plenty of youthful men and women who came in there, but lost that youthfulness very quickly. In taking less, moving less, and sitting more, and conversing less. And that's in the 60s, which is still pretty young, even 70s, which is still pretty young. But we don't often wait to that age. We often do that very quickly. Once we habituate ourselves with the routines of day-to-day life, we have to wake up at a certain time, we have to be a certain place at a certain times, we have financial responsibilities. Well, subconsciously, and even sometimes consciously, we then tend to be very opposite of when we were in youth. Because in the youth, when we were excited and curious, we weren't afraid to take chances, even very dangerous chances, because we felt invincible. We felt infinite. We felt that we could change the world, that we will change the world. But what happened to the hippies? What happened to the hippies? The hippies eventually became the yuppies, and eventually became the very scornful politicians and people who are so rigid in their viewpoint of life. We at a certain point trade that youthful aspiration of changing the world. Tikkun Olam was just like, settle down, let me relax, I work very hard. Okay, I'll go out from time to time in order to break the monotony, but I'd much rather stay at home and not really do anything, just because, it's just, that's not me anymore. And life starts waning away. We explain what's the difference between life and, God forbid, the opposite. On the most rudimentary biological level, life begins when one cell multiplies to 2 to 4, etc., which is a process, a Tamidi process, an ongoing process within our lives. And every single second, our cells multiply, and so on and so forth. We're constantly growing. We're constantly, and God forbid, the opposite of life begins when there's a cessation of the cell multiplications. And therefore, everything starts receding immediately. And then ultimately comes to a halt, and then decay begins. At that point, the person becomes a mateh. They become a staff. Dried up. No more vigor. No more vitality, completely. And I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about the absence of life within the confines of our life. Because when one feels that they're not alive, this is what's indicative over here. That they lost their Shevet part, they lost their branch part. That I'm constantly able to produce more from season to season. I'm able to change, I'm able to evolve, I'm able to go through ups and downs. Yes, there's a summer season when I'm so alive, and then there's a fall season when my vitality of the summer starts waning away. Then comes the winter where I'm sort of hibernating, but then starts the springtime, and there's constant movement. But that's why it's so important to retain our childlike demeanor. There's a difference between childlike and childish. Being childish past our child season, our youthful seasons, is not a benefit. Childlike, on the other hand, is absolutely magnificent at all times. Retain the vibrancy, the curiosity, the desire to live, to experience, to grow, to manifest, to produce more. It's so important to retain the childlike qualities, that youthful vigor, that moisture that runs through us. To remain Shvatim for the rest of our lives. It's so important to bear that within our personality, to retain it. Very interesting, the Talmud relates that Avraham Avinu minted his own coin. On one side, it said, Zaken Uzkina. Old man and old woman. So there's a very big question in to have images of people on our coins. due to the second commandment. So it was written, Zakenu Zkena, the Talmud says, old man and old woman. On the other side of the coin, there was young Batul Ubetula, young man and a maiden. It was written. What is this? What's the purpose of this? This actually gives expression to both Shevet, which is branch, and Mateh, which means staff. Many people mistakenly believe, and even assert at times, that my youthful days are gone. That's behind me. My peak days are behind me. Now I just gotta ride into the sunset. Well, the Torah says absolutely not. God forbid. Even when one achieved Zakenus Kena, old man and old woman, one could act like a Kebachur Ubetula, like a young man and a maiden, a young woman. Even when one gets to have white hairs on their beard and on their head, or underneath their sheitel, you could nevertheless retain your youthfulness, and you must, the vigor, the moisture, with excitement, and even to take risks. Yes, to take risks. It might seem dangerous at times. To try new things, not to resign. Okay, I've been there and done that, so what? Because that's the beginning of old age. And when we talk about old age, we're not talking about a certain marker, 60s, 70s, because I've known plenty of 80 and 90-year-old, even 100-year-old people who had plenty of youth and vigor within themselves. But it's a choice, and it requires constant work. Because when we do choose life, when we do choose to live constantly, we will find so much more that we could experience and so much more that we could produce beyond our imaginations. You know, it's very interesting on a parenthetical level, and we spoke about this somewhat before. There's a certain point when we're children, then we go into that we're learning and we're observing and we're growing and we're achieving. And at a certain point, we just resign ourselves. Okay, I've learned everything. I've been to grade school. I've been to college. Okay, I don't have to learn anymore. I don't have to revisit anything I've learned. I've learned that. I've done that. I've seen that. And unfortunately, that's when old age sets in. It's an amazing story regarding the former Bobov Rebbe, Rabbi Shlomo Halberstam, Zatzal, passed away at 93 years old in the year 2000, I believe. And in his youth, well, he was a Rebbe already. He was once sitting with his Hasidim in a Farbrengen, giving over Chassidus and Torah, L'chaim abundance, and eventually they ran out of L'chaim. So they needed someone to run to the local store to get it. There was a youth that was designated for this, and they were looking for him, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. The Rebbe at that point gets up and says, I'll go find him. I'll go find this young man, and I'll send him to the store. Okay. A while goes by, and the Rebbe didn't come back to the Farbrengen. 45 minutes about, and eventually the Rebbe comes back in all sweat. He says, the Chassidus says, Rebbe, where was the Rebbe? He says, I went to get the mashke. I went to get the l'chaim. Says, but Rabbi, you said you're going to go and you're going to go and find the youth to go and send them. Why did you go? Had we known that you're going to go yourself, we would never let you go. We would have gone instead. He says, I was sitting around the bringing table, and they were looking for the youth to go and the youthful person to go and get the mashke. When I started getting older, the Rebbe said, I told myself that I must always retain somewhat of my childhood within myself, my youthful vigor. And when I saw that everybody was looking for a youth, I said, here's my inner child. It needs to come out. Let me go and get the mashke. It's so important to retain that part within ourselves. It's very interesting because regarding Moshe, as we're going to start next week, the book of Dvarim, which concludes with Parshat Zot HaBracha, which we read on Simchat Torah, amongst the last verses that praise Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah writes that Moshe was 120 years old when he passed. His eyes had not dimmed, and his vigor had not diminished. The simple meaning is, even though Moshe Rabbeinu reached 120 years, he was still youthful and so on and so forth. In other words, the years didn't take the toll on his physical body. But beyond that, Moshe retained the lichluchit, the moisture, the vigor of youth within himself. He was constantly alive. He was constantly learning. He was constantly probing. He was constantly growing. This was what the Torah says, that Moshe Rabbeinu attained old age together with the youthfulness in itself. That's such a praise to give to a human being. And Be'ezrat Hashem will continue this on Monday. And we'll have our classes on Monday through Friday, Mirza Hashem, next week. As we said in the beginning of today's lesson, that Tzion b'mishpat tipadah, the Tzion will be redeemed through mishpat, through the laws of the Torah, through learning and occupying ourselves with the Torah, and therefore we should increase our measure of learning and our occupation with the Torah in itself, and of course with Zdakah. Shabbat Shalom.